Welcome to the Insect Eras Tour. Today we are going to cover beneficial insects and a few pests. As we move through the presentation today, consider that, the pests give all the insects a bad reputation. So really, most of the insects in our landscape are doing us a favor and do provide beneficial services in our world. And I'd also encourage you to consider the life stage, the different eras that insects go through. Most insects go through a partial metamorphosis or a full metamorphosis, and depending on their life cycle, the different life cycles may offer different benefits to the ecosystem or to humans. The classic example I have pictured here are lady beetles. So you'll see the adult lady beetle eating an aphid in the picture. But the picture in the top right is actually the immature form, the larva form of a lady beetle. To me, they looks like a little baby dragon, but most people, when they see these, they think, ooh, it's a bug, I should smash it, and absolutely not. The lady beetle larvae are ferocious predators feeding on all kinds of aphids. And throughout this, we are going to talk a little bit about how you can attract beneficial insects in your landscape. So why would we even care about insects? Well, from a very broad, big picture perspective, humans can't survive without insects. They are working hard, in the background, we hardly even notice them, but they are providing all kinds of services for us. Like, imagine a world without dung beetles or decomposing insects. Think about that. Without dung beetles recycling dung back into the soil, we would still have dung present from a long, long, long time ago. So we rely on our decomposing insects to recycle dung and other organic matter back into the soil. Why insects? Well, they provide so many benefits to us. Pollinators, for instance, pollinators facilitate plant reproduction for over 75% of the world's plants. That's huge. We also need pollinators for food. They help facilitate plant reproduction for many of our crop species, our fruits, vegetables, and nuts mostly. Decomposers are the ecosystem cleanup crew. Everything from yellowjackets to bumbleflower beetles. Recycling organic matter back into the soil is so important. We have a lot of predatory insects. Predatory insects keep our pest populations down. Without a lot of our predatory insects, the mosquitoes, there'd be even more mosquitoes than we already have today, and more aphids and other pests. We also have natural enemies against invasive species. A great example of that going on right here in Colorado is Japanese beetles biocontrol research. Dr. Cranshaw has released a tachinid fly, a predatory fly that specifically targets Japanese beetles. So hopefully, eventually in time, that will help at least lower the population a little bit. Insects also provide food for many other organisms in the food web, but also in many parts of our world, insects are a sustainable protein source as well. I know here in the United States, we get a little heebie-jeebies over consuming insects, but they are a critical food source for many other parts of the world. And we get products from insects. Honey is the one that people are probably most familiar with. Did you know it takes 12 honeybees their entire lives to make 1 teaspoon of honey? They are really hardworking bees. For 12 bees to create 1 teaspoon of honey makes you a little more grateful for next time you put honey in your tea. We also get silk from silkworms, shellac from scale insects, and carmine extract from another type of scale insect that we'll talk about here. So here's our first reference. It's a love story. This is a broad example of pollinators and their plants. Plants have evolved to attract their specific pollinator, and it's a mutual benefit. So the pollinator is helping facilitate that plant reproduction, and the pollinator gets that pollen and nectar reward. So in this graphic here, you see the bee. She's visiting that flower for pollen and nectar. No idea she's helping out the plants, but the plant has evolved to attract that bee. With colors and patterns on the flower, it's saying, come here. There's lots of food. There's lots of pollen and nectar here. In that process, pollen grains are deposited on her body. She will fly to the next flower, and some of those pollen grains will be deposited in the next flower. That is a very simplified version of how pollination biology works, but you get the gist that plants and pollinators need each other, and they have evolved together. The columbines here on the right are examples of pollinator syndromes. Flowers have different traits to attract different pollinators. So that top photo, that purple columbine, is perfect for bumblebees. The red columbines, the way it's hanging and also that red color, attracts hummingbirds. And the bottom one, the white columbine with those long spurs on the flower, those are meant for hawk moths or sphinx moths that have a long tongue that can get the nectar out of those flower spurs. So pollinators and plants go hand in hand. We have a wide variety of pollinators here in Colorado. And let's run through them real quick. Hummingbirds. We have 4 types of hummingbirds in Colorado. They're migratory, and you're going to find them in flowers that are long red, orange-ish in color, and tubular as well. Look at that broad-tailed hummingbird. She's got pollen on the top of her head. Bumblebees, or well, actually bees in general. We have over 1,000 species of bees just in Colorado alone, all sizes, shapes, and colors. Different bees visit different types of flowers. So planting a variety of flowers is great for attracting bees. Most of our bees are solitary, meaning they're going to live underground or in cavity nests. Wasps, some types of wasps can also be pollinators. Here pictured here are pollen wasps, and they exclusively feed on pollen and nectar. So you'll see their pointy little abdomens hanging out of penstemon flowers this season. Flies, we're going to talk a little bit about more, but flower visiting flies are great pollinators, and they're pollinators, and syrphid flies are predators for pest insects. Butterflies are another great pollinator with over 270 species here in Colorado. We'll talk more about that. Beetles, again, many beetles are predatory beetles. So that's double benefits, pollinators and predators. And moths. We have over 1,000 species of moths in Colorado. Many visit flowers for nectar, helping to pollinate those plants. Pictured here is a white-lined sphinx moth. And bats. Bats are also pollinators. Here in Colorado, they're primarily feed on insects, but if you go a little bit further south and you appreciate a good margarita, bats pollinate the agave plant, which is how we get tequila. So wide diversity of pollinators in our world. Another great example of a love story that we see here in Colorado is the relationship between yucca moths and yucca plants. One cannot survive without the other. And the yucca moths, the females, are very smart because she will help pollinate that plant. So she deposits those pollen grains so the yucca plants can reproduce. But she also stores enough pollen. She holds it actually under her chin with little tentacles. And she saves that pollen for her young. So they're able to complete their life cycle. And without yucca moths, we would have no yucca plants. So definitely a love story between the two. All right, our next insect that we're going to talk about are fireflies. If you're familiar, This Night is Sparkling from Taylor's Enchanted Song. This always reminds me of fireflies. And believe it or not, we have fireflies here in Colorado. If you go in like late May, early June to riparian areas, I know there's locations in Fort Collins, Greeley, even south of Denver here at Roxborough State Park, you can actually see fireflies here in Colorado. We don't have the high numbers of other states, but we do have them. And we also have varieties that do not light up. So fireflies are predatory insects, very beneficial and also fun to see at night. They light up because they have a bioluminescence chemical so it doesn't, a lot of light sources use heat, but bioluminescence, they just have a chemical that allows them to light up. The males light up so they can attract their female. And I wanted to share the immature version of a firefly because it looks nothing like the adults. It almost looks like To me, it looks like a little tiny armadillo almost with those scales on the back of the immature insect. So if you see this, that is an immature lightning bug. All right, cicadas, speak now. This is a big one because we happen to be in the year where 17-year cicadas and 13-year cicadas are emerging in the eastern half of the United States. If you go to I believe it's Illinois and maybe Indiana, there's actually a little bit of overlap. So you'll have both 13-year and 17-year cicadas. They should be emerging anytime now. These insects live underground their entire lives until they become an adult when they crawl up from underground. And the 13-year and the 17-year cicadas spend those number of years underground before emerging. So if you get to see it, there's going to be cicadas everywhere, and it is going to be quite noisy because cicadas use sound to attract their mate. Here in Colorado, we actually have 29 species of cicadas. 29. But most of our cicadas live a 3 to 5 year life cycle. So they're just going to emerge every year. If you hear that buzzing, that that is the males trying to attract a mate. You may also hear if you're outside at night, sitting outside, enjoying the evening, summer weather, and you hear this click like those are Putnam cicada, Putnam's cicadas that we have here in Colorado as well. So when cicadas spend their life underground, they are feeding on juices from plant roots, but they don't cause the plants any harm. So look for cicadas. You're more likely to hear them than see them, but you might occasionally come across an adult. All right, moving on to the red album. This is a great example. You've probably consumed insects and you don't even know it. Cochineal scale insects are scale insects that are found on cactus flowers. You can see them here in Colorado, and they feed on the plant juices from the cactus. They are red and they produce a red dye through the carbonic acid. That carbonic acid does deter predators. But they also produce this cotton-like substance, which you can see in the picture, and that helps protect them from predators. The dye from this red color has been used for years and years and years, hundreds of years, to produce a dye to color fabrics. Now we actually use this dye in cosmetics, in lipsticks, and in red colored food. So if you've ever had red velvet food cake or even any of the food items in this picture here, you've definitely consumed carmine dye, which comes from our cochineal scale insects. Okay, now we got bad blood. Mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are always a pest, for humans because they do bite. They are perhaps one of the most important insects in terms of human health because in many parts of the world, they can transmit diseases. Here in Colorado, they can transmit West Nile virus. Why do we have mosquitoes? They do have a role and they feed a lot of wildlife in the food web, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and the list goes on. So they do serve a role, but we got to be smart when we live in areas where mosquitoes are. The most effective control methods for mosquitoes are to treat the larvae, and the larvae are in standing water. So if you happen to have standing water in your landscape, good to rinse that out, refresh that water often to prevent mosquitoes from breeding. Other things you can do, bug repellent is very effective at repelling mosquitoes. Consider wearing long sleeve shirt, long pants, and if you need to avoid the outdoors at dusk and dawn. And a note about bug zappers. Bug zappers are, some people use them to control insects. However, they don't actually kill very many mosquitoes. They're more likely to kill beneficial insects rather than mosquitoes. So consider skipping the bug zapper this year and wear that bug spray and clothing to protect yourself from those pesky mosquitoes. All right, big reputation. Who has the biggest reputation of all in the insect world? I think wasps rise pretty high to the top there. So let's dive in and talk about wasps because they are emerging for the season. Many are starting to build nests. And so let's talk about what you might see in your landscape. But first, let's talk about stings. People often fear wasps because they are a stinging insect. But 90% or more of all insect stings are actually caused by the western yellowjacket. The western yellowjacket is a native ground nesting wasp. But their populations are very healthy. They do well in urban areas or where there's human activity. Wasps can sting multiple times. Honeybees can only sting once. So oftentimes we say, "Ow, I was stung by a bee," but quite often it was a wasp. When honeybees sting, their barb stays in your skin. So when they try to fly off, the guts of that honeybee is essentially ripped out from them, and they are not able to survive that sting. So honeybees, they don't want to sting. They only sting if they are provoked, or a lot of times they're stepped on, but they don't actually want to sting unless they have to. Solitary bees, most of our 1,000+ species, and solitary wasps either cannot or very rarely sting. This is because solitary insects don't have a hive to protect. So they don't have that colony to protect, which means there's not much at stake. So solitary insects, if you handled them, they would sting. The females could sting you, and especially for some of the solitary wasp species, that sting would hurt. But it's not like threatening a nest for some of our social wasp species. This is important to note because there's a lot of fear around creating pollinator habitat or planting nectar flowers that attract more insects. Yellow jackets, the ones that are responsible for over 90% of the stings, uh, do not forage on flowers for nectar and pollen. So the main sting risk is not going to care so much about the pollinator habitat in your landscape. So let's talk a little bit more about yellow jackets because they are perhaps the most nuisance wasp species we have. What is their role in the ecosystem? Well, they are actually the ecosystem cleanup crew. As a scavenging insect, they feed on things like carrion or dead things. But with humans in the picture, they also feed on food in the trash cans, our barbecues, picnics, sugary drinks and food. So anytime you have a yellow and black insect flying around, quite often it is a yellow jacket. But when they do feed on the carrion, they are doing the ecosystem a favor by recycling, that bacteria, getting that bad bacteria out of the ecosystem. So what do you do if you have yellow jackets and you are worried about stings? One of the best things you can do is go buy those yellow tube pheromone traps and get them out now. The queens are emerging. She's going to look for a place to build a brand new nest. They build a new nest every year, and you can catch those queens before she has the chance to build a colony. If you happen to have a yellow jacket nest nearby, they do build their nest underground and they are well protected. Usually it's a small entrance hole, and underneath it's layers and layers of paper and brood cells. So what do? Depends on how high the risk is for stings and your tolerance for that risk. If you've got a yellow jacket nest right by your house where humans are coming and going, you may want to consider hiring a professional to remove that nest to reduce the sting risk. If the nest is far away and it's not really bothering anyone and you're not worried about getting stung, absolutely fine to leave the nest. They live a 1-year life cycle. So once fall and winter arrives, their colony will come to an end. And then you can block the hole so new nests can't be created in that same area. So it really comes down to your risk tolerance, but do be mindful, they will defend their nest if they feel that it is threatened. So they can be dangerous depending on how close human activity is. European paper wasps are another wasp with a big reputation, and that's because they are an invasive species. They are not supposed to be here, and they actually prey on caterpillars, beneficial caterpillars like butterflies, and also some of our pest caterpillars as well. They have dramatically changed the garden ecosystem since their arrival about 30 to 40 years ago. So what do? These wasps build open-faced papery nest cells under your house eave or in a dark shed. Any dark space, usually above ground. That's how you can distinguish European paper wasps from Western yellowjackets based on the nest location. They since they are an invasive species, you don't have to save them or anything. This is where wasp sprays and things like that can be very beneficial. If you choose to use that like a wasp spray, be sure to follow the directions. The label is the law. We want you to be safe and we want you to be most effective when using that wasp spray. And you want to prevent things from like drift that might kill other beneficial insects. So follow those directions to a T. If you do knock down that nest, be sure you hose down the site because if there's any survivors, they will just start rebuilding that nest right away. If you have nests that are up high and would be a hassle to get to, you could leave them. They are preying on some of our pest caterpillars as well, but no need to save the species. Their population is very high in many areas in Colorado. Other wasps that sometimes attract attention and have that big reputation are a couple other social wasp species. Bald-faced hornets and aerial yellowjackets. They make those classic funnel-shaped nests that are oftentimes high in a tree. Most of the time, people don't even know they're there. The leaves fall off the tree in the autumn, and then they see this, whoa, giant nest in the tree. But by that time, their life cycle is coming to an end. It dies when the temperatures get really cold. So no need to do anything. That nest will probably fall and disintegrate on its own. If you have children that climb trees, or sometimes arborists will come across these nests in the trees, they will sting if their nest is threatened. But the vast majority of time, these wasps are providing beneficial pest control services, and we barely even notice them. Pausing for questions. Looks like there's no questions yet, or they've been answered. So feel free to, if you do have additional questions, add them in the chat box because we're touching on a lot of different types of insects. So we can't go into them too in depth. So let me know what your questions are. Miller moths. I have to credit my sister for Taylor Swift's song "This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things," because Miller moths can be such a nuisance when they enter your homes. Why do we have Miller moths? Well, they do have a role in the ecosystem. They are pollinators for some plants, especially flowers that are open at night, and they are food for a variety of other wildlife species. Humans think they're a nuisance when they enter our homes. So, what can we do about that? You can seal up your home as best as possible. Find out where they're coming in from, because that's going to be a long-term solution. Are there holes in the screen? Maybe you need some weather stripping under your doors. Things like that can go a long way to keeping Miller moths out of your home. Also consider limiting outdoor light. Outdoor light attracts Miller moths, and so that can be an easy way. You open that front door next to your porch lights, and those Miller moths fly in. So consider limiting your outdoor lights. This year we haven't seen a lot yet. I've had two individual moths at my house. Last year we had super high numbers, so we'll see what happens this year. I do think it's worth noting their life cycle. They have a very unique life cycle. So let's run through it. During the winter, they actually overwinter as tiny little caterpillars. Those tiny little caterpillars feed on things like alfalfa. You find them out in the Colorado Eastern Plains and in Kansas and Nebraska. They're feeding on the alfalfa and surrounding host plants. They'll stay there all winter. Spring arrives and they complete their metamorphosis. So they'll make a cocoon and emerge as an adult moth. And then those moths start migrating west. And so their ultimate destination, they actually migrate to the high elevation mountains in Colorado and the Rocky Mountains. And they hang out there for the summer because it's nice and cool there. So they'll hang out there for the summer. And then once the temperatures start to cool down, they actually migrate back to the eastern plains, where the females will lay eggs, those caterpillars will hatch, and then winter comes and they will overwinter as those tiny caterpillars. During this migration, they stop over on the Colorado Front Range. This is when Miller moths tend to be a nuisance for people. How long are they a nuisance for? It varies on the year and it varies on the population. In an average year, we'll see Miller moths for maybe 2 to 3 weeks. Last year, we had a cool start to the summer. Rainy weather, nice and cool. Didn't heat up, till much later in the season. So those Miller moths, they had no reason to leave. They thought, oh, there's blooming flowers, cool temperatures. We're just going to hang out here for a while. Once the temperatures heated up, then they started migrating to the mountains. So the number of Miller moths really depends on the weather, how many individuals there are per year, which ebbs and flows, and the number of blooming flowers in the area too. If there's lots of flowers, which we tend to have along the Front Range, that's a nice stopover for them. So they might hang out a little bit longer. We'll see what kind of Miller moth season we have this year. Butterflies. This reminds me of the song You're So Gorgeous by Taylor Swift. We have over 270 species of butterflies here in Colorado. And the best way you can attract them is figure out what that caterpillar host food is. We actually have a great fact sheet on the CSU Extension website on attracting butterflies, and it lists caterpillar host plants for many of the common species that we see. Planting nectar flowers is also great for the adult butterflies and providing habitat spaces. So butterflies are going to rest in trees and shrubs, anywhere where it can get out of the wind and the rain, but they also like open and sunny areas as well. Few examples of host plants that you might add to your landscape. Monarch butterflies host on milkweed. Milkweed is a great native plant that helps a wide variety of pollinators. Painted ladies host on thistles, sunflowers, mallows, and a wide variety of other plants. Pictured here, these caterpillars are on dill. This is actually the black swallowtail caterpillars, and they host on dill and fennel in your vegetable gardens. So no worries, if you want to harvest that dill for yourself, maybe plant a little extra dill and save some for the caterpillars so that way you have enough dill for your own use as well. Tiger swallowtails host on a variety of different plants, and two-tailed swallowtails host on chokecherry and ash trees. That's important to note because we're losing a lot of our ash trees due to emerald ash borer. So if you're looking for a new native drought-tolerant shrub to plant, consider chokecherries, but do note that they sucker a lot. So it is a little, it's a little bit of a job to manage that plant. But it's a great host plant. The flowers are great for pollinators, and the berries are great for birds. Another gorgeous species we see are Sphinx moths. We have about 30 species here in Colorado. Now, these moths are often confused with tomato hornworms. So tomato hornworm and tobacco hornworms are 2 out of 30 species. And so just like butterflies, each species has a different host plant. Now, tomato hornworms and tobacco hornworms do feed on our tomato plants, but all the other species host on a wide variety of other plants. Pictured here is the white-lined sphinx moth. This is perhaps the most common sphinx moth you'll see. They host on a wide variety: grape, elm. Their native host is San Verbena. Here's a San Verbena out on the eastern plains of Colorado, and a caterpillar of a white-lined sphinx moth. So grape, elm, San Verbena, evening primrose, and there's a few more as well. So providing those host plants, providing nectar flowers, and habitat spaces can help you attract sphinx moths to your landscape. Okay, we're going to continue with Taylor's reputation era. Look at what you made me do. Japanese beetles are an invasive pest, one of the biggest pests that we have around, because the adults damage by feeding on over 300 types of vegetation. The larvae can also feed on your turf grass and damage the turf grass as well. So What do you do if you've got Japanese beetles in your landscapes? Believe it or not, hand picking is one of the most beneficial things you can do because you're protecting your own individual plants. Japanese beetles do something called aggregation feeding, meaning when they start feeding, the plant emits a smell, a chemical smell that attracts more beetles to it. So by hand picking, though it's tedious, can help protect your individual plants. So just knock them off in a jar of soapy water. You can squish them too. That's not going to do any harm. And get some of those beetles off of your plants. Traps are not recommended because they're actually going to attract a lot more beetles to your plants. It might be satisfying to see the number of beetles in that trap, but just know you're attracting that many more beetles to your landscape. If you have neighbors that are insistent on using traps, make sure that they are at least 30 feet away from your vegetation or your neighbor's vegetation that they want to save, because those beetles will find the trap and then they will find the neighboring plants as well. We have a great fact sheet outlining all the products on the market for Japanese beetles. Check out the Japanese beetle fact sheet. Make sure you consider pollinators before applying pesticides, because many flower species are blooming at the same time Japanese beetles are active, which means if you spray those plants, you're going to kill a lot of our bees and other beneficial insects as well. So do your research, reach out to your local extension office with questions about that. Another thing you can do, just because you have adults in your landscape doesn't mean you have grubs in your lawn. And that is because a lot of times homeowners don't keep their lawns wet enough for Japanese beetles to survive. So they're flying in from the golf course or the park or open space turf grass that is wet all the time. So one thing that you can do, that probably the cheapest thing you can do to prevent grubs from being in your lawn, is making sure your turf grass dries out in between waterings. This takes a little bit more paying attention to your irrigation. Most of the time, we set the sprinkler system, let it run in the middle of the night, and we don't think twice. But if you do monitor the moisture in your turf grass and make sure it can dry out in between waterings, grubs are not going to live there because they need that soil to be moist 100% of the time. Other things you can do as you add new plants to your landscape, consider adding Japanese beetle resistant varieties. Believe it or not, there are some. Our colleague John Mergel in Douglas County actually did a survey to look at plants that are heavily fed on Japanese beetles and not as heavily fed on by Japanese beetles. So check out the extension website for those lists and consider adding new varieties. Believe it or not, roses, there are quite a number of variety of roses that do not attract Japanese beetles. Other things you can do is keep your plants as healthy as possible. A healthy plant will be able to withstand a lot more damage from the beetles. And buy plant material locally. And I say this because Japanese beetles were in Palisade and they were able to eradicate them from Palisade this was a while ago. But just a couple of years ago, Japanese beetles was brought through most likely infested turf grass, and now Japanese beetles are in the Grand Junction area. So we want to prevent the transporting pests as much as possible. Okay, I'm going to check for questions. Okay, no questions. Let's keep going. Oh, actually, it looks like we have one. Okay, found what I thought was an egg on the leaf of a milkweed today and thought of the monarchs. I have seen the larva in my landscape, but it's been a while. Milkweed will bloom later this season, probably like late June, July-ish. One thing that I didn't mention about caterpillars, milkweed caterpillars, any butterfly caterpillars that you want in your landscape. The predation by European paper wasps is pretty high. So if you do want to protect those caterpillars, you might consider covering that plant like with a light screen, just for a while, so the caterpillars can complete their life cycle. They can get to that chrysalis or cocoon stage, and that way will hopefully prevent predation from the European paper wasps, because they are everywhere. Okay.
Lisa,
What do bald-faced hornets, what do they eat? They eat a wide variety of insects. I don't think there's anything special that they specifically seek out. I think they're an opportunistic predator. So a wide variety of insects.
Hey, Lisa.
Okay, we're moving on
Lisa,
to, oh,
so that monarch butterfly question particularly was asking about when do you think someone who has planted milkweed might first see eggs showing up on plants? In other words, when do the adults roll through here at the earliest?
yeah, so here, that's a great question. Gonna be later this summer, probably in July. Now, we are not on the direct path of the monarch migration corridor, but we still see monarchs. Monarchs are gonna lay eggs later in the summer. So we're looking like late July, August timeframe. Usually monarchs are going to pick a place to lay their eggs where milkweed has been established and where there's a lot of it, so those caterpillars have a lot of food. So you might not see caterpillars right away. A lot of people plant milkweed and then they don't see caterpillars and get discouraged. Keep trying. Those butterflies are very picky because they want to ensure the survival of their larvae. So the best time is well, you'll start to see eggs hopefully late summer time frame. And then they'll start, August into September they'll work their way south, where they overwinter in Mexico. Good question. Okay, so Taylor's got a song called The Man, and this is something that social insects do not have to worry about at all. And that is because social insect colonies are run by the females. And so this pertains to honeybees, some of our other social bees, some social wasp species, termites, and ants. Social insects are defined by three different characteristics: overlapping generations within the hive, within a colony, a reproductive division of labor, which means there's only one queen and she's the only one that lay eggs, and the colony, it's their job to protect her because she ensures the survival of the colony, and cooperative brood care. So when insects reach a certain number of days old, for honeybees, it's like 9 to 10 days. They actually tend to those baby bees, the larvae, and make sure they're getting the pollen and the resources they need to become an adult bee. Social insects are very altruistic, meaning it's about the survival of the colony and not the individual. So they will do what they need to do to protect it. All the bees within the colony, you've got the queen and the workers. The workers are all sisters. So all those females are working together. They're making sure the hive stays clean. There's enough food and resources. Honeybees specifically in the wintertime, they cluster around the queen and they beat their wings to keep their hive warm. It could be 0 degrees outside Fahrenheit, but it'll be over 90 degrees Fahrenheit inside that colony. So they work really hard to keep that colony going. Males are in the picture for mating purposes, but they don't actually contribute to the ongoing the work of the colony and to making sure that colony survives. So very interesting social dynamics with our social insects. Okay, so another promise that you'll never find another one like me. That encompasses a lot of our beneficial insects that you see in the landscape. So lady beetles are a great example. They are ferocious aphid eaters. We have over 80 species here in Colorado alone. So we talked about the larva of a lady beetle. Here's the adult. And then this bottom right-hand picture is a pupa. So they go through a full metamorphosis. So we love having ladybugs in our landscapes. Aphid infestations are a great way to attract more ladybugs. Buying them at the garden store. You can always buy ladybugs at the garden store. They really aren't that effective at providing pest control in your specific area, your specific landscape. And that is because they can fly, they have wings, and they're going to disperse. So maybe a few would hang around, but they aren't necessarily an effective control. The ladybugs you buy are a native species, and they actually harvest those lady beetles out of the wild, and then sell them at the garden store. So, not the best thing to do. I will say though, lady beetles are a great way to provide education to kids, grandkids. They are a harmless insect, and it's really great for to show the appreciation for lady beetles and other insects by releasing ladybugs. Lacewings are another garden friend you absolutely want and probably have in your landscape. They are attracted to lights at night, so you'll oftentimes see them flying around your porch light. They are ferocious predators of aphids and small caterpillars. So here's what their larva looks like. And look at those pinchers in this picture. Those pinchers are used to take down caterpillars. If you hold one, they can pinch your skin a little bit, but it's just a light pinch. It's not too bad. I speak from experience. But lacewings provide great pest control services in our landscape. Here's what the eggs look like too. So if you do have an aphid infestation, if you look underneath the leaves nearby, you might be lucky enough to see the eggs on these little stalks underneath a leaf. You can attract more lacewings by planting flowers that provide nectar, and you can purchase eggs for biocontrol. Now, this is a little bit more effective than lady beetles because the eggs and the larva can stay in one place. They can't fly away right away. So you might find them to be a little more effective as a biocontrol. Another one is our syrphid flies, because syrphid flies provide double benefits. They are predators and pollinators. So here is the larva of a syrphid fly, and see all the little aphids in this picture? It is going to town on those aphids. Syrphid flies mimic bees and wasps because bees and wasps are stinging insects, so predators and humans will avoid them if they look like a stinging insect. But these syrphid flies are completely harmless, and you'll quite often see them visiting flowers for nectar. You can tell it's a fly and not a bee or a wasp by those teeny tiny little antenna. If you can't see the antenna, it's probably a fly. Flies also have giant fly eyes that go, to the top of the head, where other insects have smaller eyes. And flies only have one pair of wings as well. So we love our syrphid flies and our flower visiting flies. Okay, praying mantis. This is from Taylor's Midnight album. This lady has simply had enough. Praying mantis get a reputation because after mating, sometimes they will consume their mate, the male partner. This can happen. That female, she needs resources so she can lay her eggs, and they are opportunistic hunters as well. So they'll hunt a wide variety of things. They've even been known to hunt hummingbirds in some cases. So they are excellent hunters. We do have 7 species in Colorado. The 5 native species you're more likely to see out on the eastern plains. Here along Colorado Front Range, you're likely to see 2 of the introduced species: the European mantid, which is the most common, and the Chinese mantid. Notice their forelegs. Look at their modified forelegs that are used to grasp prey. So they stalk their prey and are very quick to grasp their prey. The other unique thing about praying mantis is they have the ability to move their head. No other insects have that ability. But with the ability to move their head and those giant eyes, they can hunt, they can look for their prey. So again, great hunters. You may find their egg cases on patio furniture or your fence. If you see these are called uticas, and this is an egg sac. Now, European mantid egg cases will survive the winter and hatch the following year. Chinese mantid cases typically do not. If you buy praying mantis as a biocontrol, it's typically the Chinese mantid, and they typically don't survive the winter. They are also not too effective for biocontrol because they're so mobile, and they are going to go and seek out their prey. So a fun insect to observe in the landscape, but not super effective for biocontrol. All right, we're still in the midnight era. Best believed I'm still bejeweled reminds me of all of our jewel beetles. Now, jewel beetles, along actually with all of our other beetle species, are the most diverse insect group in the insect in our insect and arthropods. And when you look at the biodiversity of all the species on the planet, plants, mammals, birds, if you look at the entire amount of biodiversity, beetles comprise nearly 25% of all that biodiversity. So hugely diverse. Jewel beetles come in a variety of colors, sizes, and shapes from all over the world. We have about 15,000 species worldwide. I'm even wearing some jewel beetle earrings with me today. Because why not? We're going to talk about two jewel beetles you might see in Colorado. Jewel beetles, also known as metallic wood-boring beetles or flat-headed borers. The biggest pest that we have in Colorado that is a jewel beetle is by far the emerald ash borer. This was found in Boulder County in 2013 and has slowly been spreading. Still not confirmed throughout the Denver metro area, but it has been confirmed in the surrounding counties. So Boulder County, Broomfield, Larimer, Adams, a little bit in Jefferson County, and just last year we actually found it in Littleton, which is Arapahoe County. So it spreads naturally, very slowly, but if someone brings infested firewood, that can start a new infestation. We also found it in Carbondale last summer as well. So both Littleton and Carbondale were likely firewood transports. Emerald ash borer is deadly to all ash trees, white ash, green ash, and varieties like autumn purple ash. So what do you do? Biggest thing for homeowners to know is where emerald ash borer is in your area. And if you reach out to your extension office, we can certainly help you with that. If emerald ash borer is in your area, it's best to make a plan sooner than later. If it's not in your area, good to think about a plan, but you might not need to take action yet. Consider if your tree is worth saving or if removal is the option. A healthy tree is going to be able to be protected well with insecticides. An unhealthy tree, a small, scraggly tree, if it's declining in health, if it's got a bunch of dieback, is not going to be a good candidate for treatment because the insecticides are systemic, which means the roots uptake those chemicals. And a stressed out, unhealthy tree is just not going to be able to move the systemic insecticides throughout the tree. So you may consider removal in the future. The other consideration, if you decide to keep your tree, is when to start treatments. This is going to vary depending on where you are in the state of Colorado and your peace of mind. If you're not in an emerald ash borer infested area, you can probably wait to treat. But if that tree is your prize tree, some people don't want to wait that long and they would rather treat now. It's important to know though, you can wait till emerald ash borer is in your area to start treatment as long as that tree is healthy. That brings us to the treatment options. So emamectin benzoate was a game changer because research over and over has shown that you can actually start treatment after emerald ash borer has been inside your tree, as long as the tree hasn't lost about more than 30% of the tree's canopy. So that's huge. That gives people more time to make a decision on when they start treatment. Out of the four options, emamectin benzoate is labeled for 2 years, but research shows it can last 3 or even longer. So you could do treatment every 2 or 3 years. It is applied via a trunk injection. That is a safe way to get that insecticide through the tree. And while it does create small wounds in the bark, a healthy tree will be able to heal those over. So emamectin benzoate is a great option. The other options are also very effective, but they only will give you about 1 year of control. With azadirachtin, maybe you can get 2 years if emerald ash borer is not high in numbers in your area. Azadirachtin is derived from neem oil, so it is sort of a more natural option for an insecticide. And then dinotefuran and imidacloprid are neonicotinoid pesticides, very effective if applied correctly. We do recommend hiring an arborist. You have to for actually all four except for imidacloprid. If you choose to do it yourself and purchase imidacloprid at a garden center or hardware store, couple things to keep in mind. You want to make sure that you remove all the organic matter within a couple of feet of your tree, because that product binds to organic matter. You also do not want to apply this if you have flowers blooming underneath your tree, because the flowers will uptake the product and that will potentially harm beneficial insects. You also want to apply appropriately so you don't have runoff. You want to make sure that the tree gets as much of that product as possible. So we're happy to walk you through these options in much greater detail. Another jewel beetle you might see are honey locust borers. Honey locust borers do not kill honey locust trees. They are a secondary pest, meaning they are going to find stressed out and sick honey locust trees and infest the tree that way. So if you see honey locust borers, the bigger question is, how can I improve the overall tree's health? Usually it's going to come down to more water throughout the year, even in the fall and in the winter, and maybe consider the root health. Maybe adding mulch under the tree would be helpful. Honey locust borers do create that same D-shaped exit hole, the same size as the emerald ash borer. So if you're curious about what is inside your tree, the first thing to do is identify that tree, and we're happy to help you with that. All right, dragonflies. I think this is worth noting. This reminds me of you're on your own, kid. You always have been. Because the female dragonflies drop the eggs into the water, a pond or a stream, and then the female she does her own thing. And those dragonfly nymphs are on their own for 2 to 3 years underwater. And they are great hunters. They actually have a jet propulsion mechanism on the tip of their abdomen, so they can zoom through the water and hunt for their prey. Once they become an adult, 2 or 3 years later, they crawl out of the water. They're still great hunters. They can catch their prey and they'll actually consume it in flight. A wide variety of dragonflies here in Colorado. And to wrap up our last critter, this is from Taylor's most recent album, Who's Afraid of Little Old Me? That is definitely reminds me of spiders, because there's so much fear around spiders. So what do you need to know? Spiders are beneficial in our landscapes. They feed on all kinds of pest insects, and they prefer to keep to themselves. They don't actively seek out humans. They do not want to bite. If you handle a spider, it will bite. But a lot of times, spider bites are so misdiagnosed so often. And it's important to note we only have one venomous spider here in Colorado, and that is the black widow. Black widows want to keep to themselves. They prefer to stay in that dark corner without any human interference. So they will only bite if they're pressed up against your skin. If you are bit by a black widow spider, please do seek medical attention. One common myth is that Colorado has brown recluse spiders. That is not true. We are not in the native range of brown recluse spiders. They are much further east and south of Colorado. The Denver Museum of Nature and Science is our spider experts here in Colorado, and they actually collect spiders. And they've only ever come across 1 or 2 brown recluse spiders. So if a recluse spider is found in Colorado, it was likely brought in, it hitchhiked in someone's car or suitcase, and that is how it got here. They do not naturally occur here. You'll see a wide variety of spiders here in Colorado. Some of my favorites are wolf spiders. You'll know it's a wolf spider if she's had babies. She actually carries her babies on her back until those little spiderlings are big enough to hunt on their own. You might come across crab spiders, which actually can camouflage to match their materials, so they can or match the plant materials so they can better hunt their prey. You might see orb weavers, jumping spiders, woodlouse spiders. We have a wide diversity, and spiders do tend to keep to themselves and provide benefits in our landscape. So I have just a couple minutes. So to wrap up, karma is planting flowers and providing habitat in your own landscape. So consider attracting more beneficial insects by providing a wide variety of flowers, a diversity of flowers that bloom all season long, from the early spring all the way through fall. And avoid those double flowers. If you're not familiar with a double flower, that is a flower that has been intentionally bred by horticulturalists. Big, beautiful flower, but it also does not have the plant reproductive parts in it, so it won't have the pollen and the nectar sources. If you love your double flowers, that's great. Keep those and maybe consider adding some that are that provide pollen and nectar for those beneficial insects. Everything is about balance. Consider ornamental grasses and other non-flowering plants, because a lot of those can provide sheltering areas for beneficial insects. And consider natives and also horticultural varieties in the landscape. Habitat needs are also water, shelter, and space. So water sources, shallow water dishes, bird baths are all great options. Um, and in terms of shelter, our ground nesting bees need bare soil areas. Many of our other insects need plant material to shelter in. A butterfly might find shelter in a conifer tree. So having sheltering areas through plants can go a long way. And then space. Some of our pollinators and other beneficial insect populations are potentially declining, and so by offering habitat spaces for them, we can provide them homes and shake off that fear. There's a lot of fear around insects, and a lot of it simply isn't true. Or, there's some nuances. Like, for instance, we have a lot of non-stinging wasps. Versus the yellow jacket, that is the primary reason for stings. So we can certainly answer any questions and help dispel those myths and shake off that fear around insects. If you want to learn more about bees specifically, you can sign up and participate in a community science program called Native Bee Watch. We provide all the training for you, and we'll teach you to identify bees in one of 8 different categories. So we'll dive much deeper into specifically our native bees. So visit nativebeewatch.org for more information. And with that note, it's 1 o'clock on the dot. Thank you all so much for listening today. I appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed insects around the Taylor Swift eras and learned a little bit more about insect eras that you might see in your own garden and landscape. So I'll hang on for a few minutes to answer any questions. Thank you all.
There is
Ooh,
one question about
okay.
grasshoppers.
Grasshoppers. And so the question is, grasshoppers have already been seen. Is no-low bait effective? Off the top of my head, I actually don't know the answer to that. So I would recommend, my email is in the this last slide. Shoot me an email and I will find out that answer for you, because I cannot remember off the top of my head. Any other questions? And John or Eric, if you happen to know the answer to that, please hop in. Or Cassie, please hop in.
So I have heard that no-low bait's is effective when the grasshoppers are small enough. The trick is that right now no-low bait is completely unavailable.
Yeah.
So although it is theoretically a workable solution, it's practically not a solution because you just can't find it.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, any other last questions? Okay, well, thank you all so much. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Lisa.